This is dedicated to all the soldiers fighting bravely for Klal Yisrael. May they be successful in destroying the enemy and return home safely and unscathed. And also that the hostages are released immediately, and we don't have to give away terrorists and murderers to get them back.
Okay, yeah, I hope it all resolves itself soon. All right, teach us, Kev, before I go.
Okay, so this week's parasha is Parashat Vayakel, which means to give or to donate, and it talks about donating all the materials and the components for the Mishkan and all the things related to it. And one of the items is the copper basin called the kior, and this is appropriate for Gavin, where before the Kohanim did their avodah, the Levim used to wash their hands with this. And it was made of copper, which is the word for Hebrew is nechoshet. And while the Jews were in Egypt, they want the woman, the wives, wanted to maintain the birth and wanted to keep the birth rate going. So to entice their husbands, they used copper mirrors, and that's how they maintained the birth rate and continued having children. And these copper mirrors were used in a skewer. Moshe was a bit reluctant because he said was used for lustful purposes, but then Hashem said no, it was actually used for holy purposes. So even more so, that it was used, excuse me, for the copper basin, as they say, and they used all the materials, like there were rubies and there were fancy precious stones and especially dyed materials that was like all the best quality stuff where it was used to make the curtains and the covers and all sorts of all the parts and of the Mishkan and the actual courtyard. So all the best stuff was used for this, to have a end product that had a lot of kavod and looked like top class and looked like it, and it was of high quality.
Good.
Excuse me.
All right. I learned something, Kev. That was nice, man. I'm going to start the Gemara share. And what we were saying yesterday is this bottom line principle. Rav Huna Bachia is arguing with Rav Yosef. Rav Yosef says that you can extrapolate the imposition of a fine from one case to another similar case, as well as normative tort law for compensation. And Rav Huna Bachia is saying that you can only do this in the case of compensatory damage and not in the case of causative damage. Okay, so what was the answer for Rav Huna Bachia's proof? Is it was taught in the Bryce, as we remember, originally that the Rabbonim said that one who contaminates somebody's produce with tumah, or one who renders someone's wine nesech by pouring as a libation for idol worship, in both cases these are indiscernible damage and there's a liability to pay. Now, if you contaminate tahor, pure produce, it causes the owner loss. And if the produce was teruma, it may no longer be eaten by an ordinary Jew, only by the Kohanim. And if it was chulin, like ordinary unsanctified food, it's rendered unfit if people are careful to eat it in a state of tara and purity. Now, you also can't sell it to just about any Jew. It depends on where they're holding in terms of level. and that's in Gittin 52b. Now, Nesech wine that's been used for idolatrous libation basically means you cannot derive any benefit from it. Not sprinkling, not consuming, not selling it, etc. And therefore you cause the owner a financial loss. Now, in both those cases, the damage cannot be detected by physical means. It's legal, not physical damage. What do we mean? Is that it's indiscernible in that you haven't affected the quality of the product, or the product has lost some of its value in terms of the what the market-related share is. The fact of it is, if there's spiritual contamination, you cannot use it. And therefore, is indiscernible damage considered damage? By biblical rule, it's not. So, although deraisa, you're not liable, because if you render somebody's wine nesech, you commit an act of theft when you take the wine to pour it. And the reason it wouldn't be liable to pay is because to the eye or to the palate it's undamaged and it lies before the owner, meaning you can just take it back to the owner and say, yeah, your wine is before you and you need not pay for it. But the rabbis were not satisfied with this, and therefore it's the Rabbanon, a rabbinical decree, that the fine is imposed upon those who deliberately penetrate wine and make it unfit for use. Okay? Now, that was the first two examples given. Now, the Gemara mentions that in the Brisa, at a later stage of Jewish history, they said one who mixes teruma into somebody's chulin produce is also liable to pay. So, in fact, the first case, do you remember, was making somebody's wine tuma. The second case was using it for nesech and libation for idol worship. You can't use it. But this last case was, if you mix ordinary produce with teruma, it's only reserved then for the kohanim. And in that particular case, one is also liable to pay. Now, what we are saying is, if there's a biblical enactment to pay in a later case, why would it be a case? Why would it be the case? Meaning, if they hadn't included this case later, why would there be no liability? What's the reason? So the reason that Rav Bachia puts forward is it not because the liability for indiscernible damage is a fine, a knas, and therefore we do not extrapolate from the imposition of a fine in one case to other similar cases. So in other words, the Brisa statement that they later said indicates that had they not later taught this aspect of law, we wouldn't have said it on our own, that one who mixes teruma in another person's chulin is liable. So therefore, we couldn't have extended the fine imposed on one who contaminates produce or renders wine nesek to one who mixes teruma in somebody's chulin. And that's why, according to Rav Huna bar Chia, it's because we generally do not extrapolate from a fine imposed in one case to a similar case. And accordingly, if the reason an informer is liable is that the rabbis imposed a fine on him in the case of getting your fellow Jew's field confiscated, in that case you were given a fine and therefore you have to pay. But we can't infer from that law that one who perpetrates positive damage or indirect damage by speech or by setting a chain of events in motion is liable. Now, Tosfot just brings a commentary that you could actually say that if these were based on legal histories, maybe the case never came up immediately, and therefore the rabbi never posed a fine in such a case until the situation came to the fore. But Rav Huna bar Chia would say in return, but you could, if it occurred, extrapolate it from the principle had it been compensatory, but not had it been a fine. So that's his argument to Rav Yosef, who dismisses the proof. And Rav Yosef says something very clever, guys. Listen to this. Kev, you're also shutting. Are you okay, buddy? Okay. So what Rav Yosef says is, listen, there's a reason that the Brisa deals separately with this last case of somebody who mixes truma with somebody's chulin, because he's suggesting that the Tanaim of the Brisa originally held that the ones who issued a decree were concerned only with preventing a major loss, as in the case of one who contaminates produce with tumah or renders wine nesek. They weren't concerned with preventing a minor loss, as in the case of one who mixes truma with somebody's chulin. Why? Because if you mix truma into chulin, who's it prohibited for, Kevin?
The Cohen,
No, the
the
Israelites.
Levites. So
The Israelites,
uh,
because and the Kohen is the only one that can use it, truma. So therefore, if the Kohen is the only one, if the Kohen is the only one that can use truma, we said that the price has to be sold at a discount because the Kohen is the only one that is interested in that share of the market. And therefore, it's not as if the entire product is rendered unfit for use. It just means you can't sell it for as much as you would have had you had a broader audience to sell it to. And therefore, Rav Yosef is saying it's not because it was rendered a fine by the rabbis, because biblically there's no such thing as a fine on that issue. He was saying, yes, it is rendered a fine, but the reason why you can't extrapolate necessarily in the later case is because the rabbis issued a fine that can be extrapolated, but in similar cases. What's a similar case? If you render somebody's product unusable, it can extend to another case where you render somebody's product unusable, discernible damage. But you can't then bring a case of what happens if there's a minor loss and they only have to sell it at slightly less than the market value. So he was saying it's not that you cannot extrapolate the law of one fine to another similar case, is that this is not a similar case. It might be a fine, but it's to do with a small amount of money loss compared to a major financial loss. And they therefore didn't impose a decree in this case. And in the end, they held that those who issued the decree were concerned with preventing a minor loss as well. So he's saying eventually the reason why they extended this issue of the one fine of a major loss to a fine of a minor loss is they thought at the end of the day, they didn't want any person that had their product taken from them and returned, and therefore they suffered some loss, whether it was major or minor, to be at a disadvantage. And then upon arriving at that understanding, they ruled that the decree also included one who mixes truma with somebody's chulin. So the Brice's separate mention of one who mixed truma into somebody's chulin wasn't due to some general rule regarding fines, as Rav Hunabachir said, but it's amended understanding of the decree, meaning the Brisa can't be construed as an indication that we generally don't extend a fine posed in one case to similar cases, but that initially it wasn't mentioned because there was a minor loss, whereas the first two cases were major losses, and then the rabbis in that case extended it to all financial losses of a similar nature. So he's saying it has nothing to do with the fact that it's a fine. You can still extend one case to another. Okay, does everybody understand? Okay.
Damon. So
Yeah.
in terms of consumption, the Cohen can still consume it, even though the truma, even though it's been mixed with chulin. Can he sell it? He can trade in it. Can he consume it?
Okay, I think that's an excellent question. It was a question I've thought of. So the thing of it is truma is set aside for the Kohen. It's not that the Kohen
Yes.
can't have a chulin, but nobody else can have truma. That's the issue. As long as the chulin is in a state of tahor, purity, and it's not infected and tameh, then there's no reason why the Kohen can't also have chulin. But the truma is an extra portion set aside for Kohanim and Leviim only. So there's truma smaisa and truma sheni. Do you get what I'm saying? But it's definitely sold at a lower price because it's a smaller segment of the market you can sell to, so the demand is not high. But the Kohen can consume chulin. It's just no one else can consume truma. So, Gav, do you understand the principle? Are you able to answer as to why between Rav Yosef and Rav Huna Bachia?
Gavin, you're on mute.
No, I can't. Damon, sorry, I've had a disaster. Just trying to get even here to get up and running for this. I'm barely
sorry.
concentrate. So,
Okay.
Sorry,
right.
I'm even lucky to be in this meeting. I'll be honest.
All right, but we're lucky to have you. We feel all warm and tickly and fuzzy inside. We really feel this
I
privilege.
appreciate it. I'm trying to get into this. I'm battling. My mind's all over the place because this whole thing's been an absolute nightmare just to try.
All right, so can I give it to you?
guys.
Can I give it to you in one sentence?
I'm going to try to concentrate. Yeah, I'm trying.
All right. So basic Rav Huna Bachia turns around and says, listen, if you could extrapolate one case to another, you could work out that if somebody's Nesek wine that they stole and they used for idolatrous libation renders that person that they stole from, that wine now, even if they return it to the person, is unusable through spiritual indiscernible damage, causative damage. They never directly putrefied the wine. It's a concept. So it's causative or indirect damage, okay? And in the same case where they had somebody's product and they made it tumor, they've caused indiscernible damage or causative damage. And therefore, he's saying those two cases, the rabbis placed a fine on it because biblically it's not prohibited, Gavin. You can return it to a person like somebody's comments and say, well, your Shemesh Regal wine is, whiskey is before you. Haven't stolen anything. The fact that you can not use it is too bad. You haven't actually prevented the person from getting it back, and therefore biblically they had no way to sue you for it. But the rabbi said this is not on, so therefore they made it a fine. Okay, it wasn't compensatory. Why? Because compensatory would mean if I took your wine and I smashed it or I drank it, you don't have the wine left. Therefore, I'm compensating you for your loss. But if I make it spiritually impure and I return it to you, what am I compensating? I gave it back to you, Gav. Therefore, the rabbis had
Why
to.
can't they just? I know. I do hear that. Why can't they just buy another bottle as opposed to giving a fine?
Well, the fine is exactly that. They either give
It's
cash.
another bottle.
They either give another bottle of cash because they say, listen, I know you don't think you've damaged anything because you're returning it to the person. So that's not compensation. You're returning exactly what they had. Compensation is when it's not there and you have to return it. A fine is when you return it, but you have to bring another one anyway because they can't spiritually use it. And therefore, Rav Huna is saying it's a fine. It's not a compensatory damage. What is his is before him. So therefore, he's saying the very fact that you can't learn that last case that was later added by the sages about truma mixed in kulin means that you can't extrapolate the principle fines of one case to similar cases because in all these cases damage occurred. Otherwise, you could have easily extrapolated the third case. And that's proof that it only occurs with compensation according to normative tort law and not according to fines. That's his proof. And Rav Yosef is saying, no, it's not true. He's saying, actually, the reason why the third case can't be extrapolated is when you render we put truma in somebody's kulin, then at the end of the day, you take that person only suffered a minor loss because only Kohanim then could have it because normal Israelites can't have truma. But a Kohen can have kulin and truma. Truma was an extra special gift just for the Kohen. It was reserved for the Kohen. It's like having Maisa or tzedakah. So therefore, no Israelite could consume it. And what happens is the Kohanim then dictated the price at a lower fee because it was a smaller audience. And otherwise, you'd suffer complete loss. So here, they got it at a discount, the Kohanim. And we said the other day that it's funny because Chalav Yisrael milk in South Africa is at a premium because there's a smaller audience, and if they don't produce it, something that's Chalav Yisrael is not going to get Chalav Yisrael, and he pays a premium. But in those days, it seemed that the smaller audience could dictate if they weren't prepared to pay because they didn't really, it didn't leave the other person any choice but a total loss. So I think what's happened later, Gavin, is the markets have readjusted themselves according to the buyer dictates. The more the buyer seeks it as value, the more the seller, he will pay the seller. The markets have changed. But the bottom line is what Rav Yosef is saying to Rav Huna Bachia is, listen, that case isn't because you can't extrapolate the law of one farm to another. In this last case, the original owner only suffers a minor loss at the slightly discounted rate of now that only a Kohen can buy it. And therefore, they could never compare a case of a major loss with a minor loss. And the rabbis afterwards said, all right, we'll extend a fine to this also. But it's not because we can't extrapolate the law of a fine to another law of a fine in similar cases. It's because these were two different cases. The first two cases of major damage, and the last one of a tiny minor damage. And therefore it needed a bit of extra rabbinical interference. And it had nothing to do with not learning one case from another. The cases are not the same, he's saying. The last one is so minor. It's a good argument, isn't it?
Yeah.
Do you like the summary I've given from my head?
Yeah, no, that helped me. Sorry, because I didn't hear much of it the first time around. So I appreciate it. I want to just make sorry, go ahead. Mine's not directly related, but it's indirect. So I want to mention it, but go ahead, Kevin.
From an income point of view, because the truma was mixed with the chulin, it's there's going to be you said there's be a limited market, and they won't be able to maximize profits on this, or they won't be able to make a decent profit on this because you have a limited market, because of the Australian being exempt from consuming,
Yeah.
because of the truma portion of it. So is that where the penalty comes in, because of
Yes,
that aspect?
that's exactly it. So, for example, if Kev, I'm holding at a level where I will only have stuff that's tahor. Not every Jew did. Most Jews only had stuff that was kosher, but there were the majority of Jews that didn't want stuff with tumah in. Nobody wants sherets and dead body infections or any spiritual impurities. They don't. So what happens then is that if you steal a product of mine, and then it becomes tumah, and then the Beis Din says you better return it, and you return it, and I say, no, I can't use it. You've damaged it for me. And you said, nonsense, Damon. What I took it on Purim. I was a bit drunk, but I didn't drink from it. You can see it's sealed. I did it as a laugh or whatever, but there's a bit tumah, but listen, it's not my problem. It's here before you. I can't say anything, because had you drunk it or had you damaged the bottle of wine, then it becomes compensation for what you damaged. But you didn't damage anything. It's called indiscernible damage. And therefore, it has to be a fine. It can't be compensatory. It's only compensation if it disappeared, or I can't have it at all. That's why it's a fine, Kev. And in this last case, Rav Yosef is saying, this last case of mixing truma in chulin means now you can only sell if you give it back to me. If the Beis Din says give it back to him, now I can only a Kohen can have truma. So now I've got to sell it at a bit of a discounted price so that the Kohanim will buy it, because they can kind of dictate and say, well, we won't buy it. And in that particular case, I got a bit of a minor loss, but I didn't lose the whole thing. So therefore, they're not the same as the first two fines, where any wine that's used for nesech, for idolatrous purposes, you cannot sell, you cannot use. It's the whole thing's a write-off, but it looks the same quality. And therefore, the rabbis say it's not compensation. You brought it back to me, not you, Kev. You've never been involved in idolatry, but that idolatrous, you would bring it back, and then I'd say I can't use it. It's not. It says it's there. It's not compensation. So the rabbi said it's a fine. And the same thing if something is tumah, you'll say it's before you, and I say, well, I can't drink from it. Those two first cases are major losses. The last one is a minor discount that the Kohen had to give. And therefore, you're not extrapolating the law of a fine in two major cases with a minor case where it's similar. So it's not that you can't extrapolate a case. They're different cases. The last one is far less of a loss. It's tiny. So therefore, all Rav Yosef is saying is they're not similar cases. But of course, if they were similar in terms of loss, of major loss, you could extrapolate one court case of a fine for another in similar, but they have to be similar. That's what he's saying. Okay. Now,
can I just mention something? Sorry, it's indirectly related, but I might forget, and it's quite important. I mean, it's very useful to know. If you inherit, let's say, a whole bunch of whiskeys from a family member that's God forbid passed away, and they were secular Jews, you can actually take that alcohol and keep it. All right. Some rabbis might argue, but the majority seem to hold that you can, and I'll tell you why. Even though they didn't keep Pesach and they didn't sell it, because the Bet Din actually sells any chometz that the community forgets to sell. So you, in theory, covered. Whether the Bet Din will allow it, I don't know, but there are rabbis that do allow it. Just letting you know. So if it ever lands up in your situation, because remember, it's got nothing to do with this directly. It's got nothing to do with this, sure. But Kevin's been talking about it, and we brought it up several times now. So it's just good to know that there is a possibility of actually saving it. I'm just saying, if you inherit it.
so that is an interesting concept. I don't know how a person without your agency can sell your goods on your behalf, though, halachically. I don't know how it's possible.
So they do the whole community. They do the whole community, but I don't know if like Rabbi Abach would hold on it. I don't know if every single rabbi would.
If it's done that way, we won't be able to whine about it.
No, we won't be able to whine about it. I think you're gonna get if Gavin was near you at this point, he would just gently nudge you. Is that a long
at a minimum? At a minimum.
So, Gav, listen, I just don't know if somebody doesn't have agency on that person's behalf, if you can sell something on their behalf without their permission or without their consciousness. I mean, take a look when somebody is yoitzi for you with wine on Kiddush. You have to be aware of them and they have to be aware of you. I think it's reciprocity there. I don't think it's one party. If your mind's far away and you're not even listening to the brocha, there might be opinions that say you can do it on your behalf. And there are other cases that would say reciprocity of giver and receiver, or the seller and the buyer, having the same mindset. Even though he's not going to do anything about it and get rid of it from his cupboard. But I think maybe in Shemaim that you would turn around and say, listen, and I actually know, of course I would have sold it. I've got no awareness. So that you might be able to, if somebody's ignorant or if somebody's has retardation, I don't know if you're able to have agency on their behalf because they're not compos mentis. Almost like custodianship or guardianship. Do you understand what I mean by guardianship?
Yeah, no, I agree. The only reason why I raise it is if it ever happens to any of us, because you've always spoken, we would have, if I would have inherited a whole bunch of whiskey from somebody, I would have just chucked it away if they were secular. Now there's I'm not saying it's guaranteed. Go speak to your local rabbi, but they say that the Bet Din does sell it, and there is a possibility that some of the rabbis will definitely say yes, that you can keep it. Others also might not say it. I'm just saying, speak to your local rabbi. Don't just throw it away.
Listen, I agree with you. You can find a heter for a lot of things, except me with certain things with a base din I've tried.
Yeah.
But
it's not relevant to this. This is unrelated.
No, I think it's actually totally relevant, to be honest. I think it's very relevant. I don't think
it's not an issue. We're not disputing this. This is still an issue, you know.
No.
Before you is not ready before. It doesn't invalidate what you're saying. I'm not trying to do that. I'm just raising an issue in case any of us ever land up in that predicament. There's a possibility you could maybe save the situation, either for yourself or somebody else, you know, that's in that predicament. It's worth knowing that there is a possibility.
Interestingly enough, we're going to deal tomorrow, not today. I don't want to add complication about Rav Huna countering with another version of the same brisa. And what subject we're going to hit tomorrow, just interestingly enough, is this concept of kim lebedi rabba minay, which means the greater penalty suffices as atonement for the lower penalty. Meaning that if when committing an act where a person would get the death penalty, they committed a financial infraction, they don't have a monetary obligation for financial infractions. And therefore, on that particular basis, they might not have to pay. And this is what we're going to say, well, maybe that's exactly the case with Nesech. is that because there's some opinions that say Nesak was mentioned last, which is the idolatrous wine libation, and therefore if the guy's going to get the death penalty, he doesn't have to pay you back, and therefore the rabbis only extrapolated later that if he somehow survives this event or he doesn't get the death penalty because there might not have been witnesses or whatever, does pay you back, but that's very different to the other two cases because he renders himself, as he damages your wine, liable for idolatrous practice and therefore the death penalty, in which case he wouldn't have to pay the monetary compensation. So that's an interesting way this conversation is going to go tomorrow. But I thought it was too much for today, especially for what's Gavin's to. And Gavin, I just want to say 10 out of 10 for having, I think that's what the Gemara is about, is that you can have the most lousy day. You put in effort, and Hashem says, no matter what you've done, you put in amazing effort, and just like well done. And I know that Kevin sometimes, Arthur have had days like that. I've seen it, like bikes were stolen from Arthur. Kevin has this gone wrong, or just amazing, Jeff. Today, well done.
And
Yeah,
you
I
also
had such a big evening this evening. I needed my laptop up. You know, I said to you, I got to be home. I want to be home by 4 to. I need to graft. I was connecting with other people. Couldn't do it. And I'm trying to do everything from home. Trying to get my phone to maybe work. My phone kept dying as well. So I just drove here. And the problem is I'm not supposed to be here because the camera's here. So since Sophia put cameras in here, I generally don't come here anymore. So it wasn't such a simple thing. I just kind of barged in here because I'm desperate. I needed it for the show and I needed it for work. So I didn't have any option. All right, sorry, guys.
All right, well done. And I'm sure these are extenuating circumstances. Anybody would understand why you were there.
Yeah, but I'm frantic. It's just I've calmed down now. Actually, you have to calm down until you can hear anything. Otherwise, when you're frantic, you actually can't listen properly. It's like nearly impossible.
Well,
only when you started asking me the question, and then I started focusing. But prior to that, I was really battling.
Well, I want to thank you for admitting that you like what was the story was, so that I can help you. And I hope you don't mind if I put it all in simple English. But I did that because I just figured.
No, it did help. It did help. It did help. I can't give it over, but I've got a good sense of what you said.
That's perfect. All right. I wish you a great evening, but